Thank you, Katrina. And Van. And Ian. Okay, now. There we go. All right. A couple of things I just want you to know about. I really looked for some good jokes this week. I did not find them, but I'm going to share what I got. And they're about prayer. And Johnny was somewhat of a difficult son for his mother. And he was about 11, 12 years old. He got to that stage where he, would give her a little lip and say some things that weren't really nice at times to her. And one evening at supper, he just got to going, and she finally said, "You know what I want you to do? Johnny, I want you to go upstairs and I want you to pray. And don't you come back down here until you get an answer to your prayer." So Johnny goes upstairs. About 20 minutes later, comes back. She said, "You get an answer?" He said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, I'm really glad that God told you to be nicer to me." And he said, "No, that wasn't the answer I got. God told me to pray for you to put up with me." Okay. And then there was Billy called the minister down the street and said, "Would you come over and talk and pray for my mother? She's really sick." And the minister was kind of surprised because that family had come to his church and then left and gone to another church a little further down the street. So he said to Billy, "Billy, well, I appreciate the call, but why don't you call your pastor and ask him to come and pray with your mother?" And he said, "Well, we were afraid he might catch what she's got." 7 people caught that one. I like that. Good, thank you. Anyway, sometimes they're good. But anyway, so this morning as we talk about the idea of healness and wholeness, I just want to share with you a quote from St. Francis of Assisi. He says, "I have been all things unholy. If God can work through me, he can work through anyone." Now, metaphysically, we would say that what happened is St. Francis found out who he was. That he wasn't unholy, he was holy. And as he found that out, he stepped into that, and stepping into that, he understood that God loved him unconditionally in every way. And it kind of takes that focus, if you would, in order to deal with what we call healing. And the first thing that we kind of look at is sickness and health. We see the duality of it, many of us. And in the Course in Miracles, and we've been talking about this the last couple of Sundays and stuff, it talks about sickness, and it says that we choose to be sick. Now, I want to be a little careful with that because I can get into metaphysical malpractice by saying that if something's wrong with you, if you get ill, then you chose it. You made it happen. And I don't believe that. But I do believe that we believe in the power of sickness. That it has more power maybe than the God that we believe in. And we believe in it to the point that we judge it. And sometimes we even judge the people who have it. And anytime we're judging something that happens in the human condition, we're then saying it's right or wrong. I don't think there's a right or wrong to sickness. I think there is how we perceive it, how we believe in it or don't believe in it, that's important. I personally do not believe in sickness. I do not believe it has power over me. Does that mean Richard can't get sick and have a cold? I do. Does that mean Richard can't sick and have another issue? I could. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if I get sick physically in this world that we live in, that I can choose to either deal with it in a positive, loving, caring way. And we've seen a number of people in our congregation who've done that. Or I can choose to say, oh, sorry am I, what a victim I am. I can get mad at God maybe, if that's possible, and then start to feel less than and allow that power of what I think is sickness to overcome me, to be in charge of my life. I start to believe that my body and sickness are one, when that's not the truth. Or I can step into another way. I can start to understand that if I believe in sickness, I need to change my belief system if I am going to heal in any way. And healing has several levels. And the first level of healing is the spiritual level of healing. That's where you recognize you are whole, you recognize that you're a child of God, you recognize that within you is the power to do many great things, one of which is to heal. Then there is the emotional healing. And I think many of us know, and we've read about the fact, that our emotional makeup may create illness in our lives. Show up physically. And if that's happening, then I can do something about that by working on my emotional healing. But the spiritual healing has to come first. Spiritual healing, emotional healing. Once I have emotional healing, then I am ready for physical healing. And I think it works just that way. It's that simple. It's just difficult to demonstrate and to do. And one of the things that happened in 2000 is I went to the International Alliance of New Thought, and it was my first introduction to anybody outside of Unity, in New Thought. I lived in El Paso, Texas. Anybody who's been to El Paso, Texas knows that it's 9 hours to the next big city, and about 4 hours to a respectable sized city. And so you're kind of trapped out there in the wilderness, wonderful wilderness, I loved it, but Unity was the only New Thought I knew. They didn't have religious science, or they didn't have science of mind, or CSL now. They didn't have that in the community at that time. And so at the New Thought Alliance, I heard an individual talk who introduced me first time, Ernest Holmes. I'd heard of Ernest Holmes, but he introduced me really to Ernest Holmes and his teachings about prayer treatment. I'd never heard the word prayer treatment before. I'd heard affirmative prayer. And they're very similar, but there are some differences. And as I started to study Ernest Holmes and his teachings, I started to understand a little different way in which healing prayer can take place. And I think it has, in some ways, a little more power directly in the healing process. I'm not saying that Unity doesn't. Please don't misunderstand me. I believe in the power of affirmative prayer. But this seems to be more directly aligned with, that I'm going to talk about in a minute, directly aligned with what I have to do in order to wake up to who I am, to being that spiritual blessing. And so in Science of Mind, or in CSL, they talk about prayer treatment. And the first thing is that, and they have a 5-step process as we do in Unity, and the first one is that we have a process of recognition. And what that's talking about is that I start to recognize the omnipresence, the omniscience, and the omnipower, that's not it, omnipotence, right? The omnipotence, not omni anything. The omnipotence of God. And when I start to do that, I don't start to limit it. You see, I start to understand if God is omnipresent, God is within me and within everything. God doesn't take a detour when he runs into Richard Bunch, unless I decide that I want to feel a sense of separation. That's up to me. And all I'm doing is sensing an illusion of separation is not really true. And so we have this power that we recognize. We recognize that it is transcendent and it is also immanent within us. We recognize that it created us and we were created in its image. We start to have a new definition of God in many circumstances because we have the old one that God is up there somewhere, out there somewhere, and I've got to beg to God, please God, do certain things in order for God to listen to me or support me. And all of a sudden, I have an idea of God as principle. I have an idea of God of being the I am within me. I have this idea of God of being all there is, all the energy, positive energy in the world. And that I am connected with it, because you see, the next thing I have to do is recognize the unification of God. Now, I think Ernest Holmes got that from unity. But that's okay. I'm just kidding. Unification. So what is unification? Well, that's saying that I and what I define as the force in the universe, what I might call God, lots of different words, are one. That, as I saw it, coming out of traditional Christianity, the Christ in me is my hope of glory. The power within me, God within me, is all that I need to live a life that is more open, that is more loving, and more caring. And if I start to understand that, I understand that the force and the energy of God flows through me, as me, and heals anything that I need to be healed. Because I start to change my belief system. And so there's this recognition, and then there is this unification. And then there is this realization. The realization isn't all of a sudden I got this great idea. The aha, although it can be that. The realization is really that I realize that it is my belief system that needs to be changed at a deeper level. If I believe in sickness as a power in the universe, I need to change that belief system. Until I do, I'm not going to be able to deal with the power of wholeness and health. And so I start to realize this, and in realizing this, I begin to understand that that's where my work really begins. If I'm in recognition, and really by that, if I'm in unification, and really by that, then the next step is for me to realize what it is that I need to change in my belief system so that I can be healed. And so I look at this power of realization. And then the next thing that happens when I realize that is I realize it is happening within me. What an aha that is. And so then I can give thanksgiving and be thankful for the fact that it is happening within me, as me. And as it happens within me, and I am thankful for it, we know that being grateful creates an attitude of healthiness. Creates an attitude that says, even if I appear to be sick, I am grateful. Even if the world says I'm sick, I am grateful. I stand in that love, and I stand in the fact that I am grateful for all the opportunities I have, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to heal too. Because I'm not going to let the sickness control how I think, what I do, and where I go. I believe I have that within my control. And I start to realize that in the absolute, there is not sickness. In the absolute, there is not poverty. In the absolute, there are not financial concerns. In the absolute, there is love. And in the absolute, I can overcome those issues that I run into because I'm living in the world. It's just part of collective consciousness. It's part of being in the world. See, I don't believe in sickness, but I believe my body can break down. Please don't get those two confused. I just believe it can break down because it is of the world. And as it breaks down, it's sharing something with me. It's telling me something. And then how I celebrate that, and I mean celebrate that, how I embrace that depends on how I lead my life and how I show up. And when I lead my life in such a way that it is inspirational to others when that happens, and we have people who've done that for us here in this congregation, in this community. When I do that, I'm literally able to celebrate them and be inspired by it, and others will too. And so I am thankful for wherever I am, whatever I have. And then the next thing we have to do is release and let go. Now they say that a few years back, they said the most often, the messages that were used most often for speaking and the titles were release and let go. You probably all heard one of those messages, right? To release and let go. And that's what we learn to do. But we have to go through a process, most of us, in order to do that. You know, in the creative process, which we find metaphysically in the first chapter and second chapter of Genesis, it says that God created heaven and earth. It says that there was light and there was darkness, and God looked at it all and said, that's good, that's good, that's good. And finally it says, on the seventh day, God rested. What's that saying is that the power within us is to believe what we believe and then rely on that and release it all to the universe. If you were to, and some of you may be doing this right now, plant a seed in your garden or plant a flower seed in your flower bed, you don't every week go out and dig it up to see if it's growing, right? You just release it to the natural process and let Mother Earth and the flower seed and whatever energy God put into that, let all of that work together so that a beautiful flower comes about. We do the same things with ourselves. We release all the power that was within us. We don't try to direct it. We just release it and let it do its work because God in us is doing the work all the time. All we're doing is waking up to it. It's not a hard job. It's a fairly simple process. But emotionally and physically, it's challenging. And I know that and admit that. And so we release and we let go. Now, in order to release and let go and see something evolve, to have it manifest itself from the invisible to the visible, there are three things I think that are really important. Number one, we must continue to have the conviction of our beliefs. We must be of a nature that we truly believe that what we have changed into and the power we have will bring about different results. We have to be convinced of that. And so it's extremely important to have that conviction. The next thing we have to do is we have to have intention. Now, intention is kind of an interesting thing, and I've heard this before. I've heard it several places. Pay attention to your intention. Be sure and know where you're going and what you're thinking. And as you pay attention to your intention, then what will happen is through the power of prayer and discernment, ideas will be brought to you, resources will be brought to you, the how will be brought to you. You don't have to worry about that in advance. Let it come, and it will guide and direct you. That's what the intention does. When I set an intention, it also gives me a boundary or a barometer in which I can measure what's happening. You know, if you owned a house on a stream, a really fast stream, and you decide what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one of those paddle wheels on my house, and I'm going to let that just go round and round because I have read that it creates energy, and energy creates light. And then after I do that, I go over to my little patio and I sit and wait for the light to turn on. We all know that's not going to happen, right? But if I really have the intention, I can be guided to how to figure out how to get the light on, how to use that energy in order to get light in my house. We do the same thing. How do I use the energy of God to get life in my light? That's the intention that we hold to. The intention that my life is changing because I have changed my beliefs, because I have stayed in the power of prayer. And then the next thing is application, that we have to apply whatever we've learned. We have to apply our belief system if it's new. We have to step into it and hold true to it and decide that this is who I am and what I am and how I'm going to show up. And when I don't show up that way, I remind myself very quickly. And I don't have to forgive myself. I just remind myself that I'm growing. That occasionally I make a mistake. But it's okay. And it's then that I can apply what I am learning and apply this new understanding of what God is, who I am, how I am this spiritual being, having this spiritual experience in this place at this time. And that's how we heal. To me, that is a healing process. It's worked in my life. And I've been very fortunate. I have not had any major physical. But I had a few emotional issues. I've had a few challenges financially. And because I believed so much in what the world was saying, I had to heal. And it took me quite a while. And the reason it took me quite a while is because, you see, I believed in a certain philosophy, a certain way of life for about 45 years. And then I started to understand there's a different way and a different way of being. There's a different relationship I can have with God, a different relationship with myself. And it was then that the healing started to take place. But I had to change my belief system in order for that to happen. If I used the old way of believing, nothing would have happened. I tried that, as a matter of fact. I would run in circles. Tried it for several years. Well, this is the way I did it before, so I'll do it again the same way, thinking I was going to get a different result. And we know what that's like. And so we step into all that God is, and when we do that, we then become prayer partners. We become prayer warriors. I'm not real crazy about that word, but you know what I'm talking about. The power of prayer works through us, okay? We're not beating somebody else up with prayer. And we become individuals who have the conviction, who have the intention, who then turn and apply that conviction and intention into something that is healing, something that's worthwhile, something that changes not only your life and my life, but changes the world itself. And that's what we're all about. Thank you.